Welcome, everyone, to the glorious return of Abandoned and Alone, the now Insomniac edition. Because, yes, if you are not joining me live and watching this later, I'm recording late at night, and that will probably be the status quo going forward. I know it's not the most convenient for everyone or most people, but just given my schedule, it's pretty much record late at night or don't do this stream at all. So I think having it is better than not having it, depending on who you ask. So yeah, I'll probably be aiming roughly for this time on a regular, hopefully weekly basis, Thursdays at 10:30 Pacific time, which is my time, which is, I know for some of you this is really late, but I'm over in California, so it's actually only 10:30 for me. And I tend to be more of a night owl anyway, and this is when most of my normal gaming time happens anyway, is this time at night when the kids are asleep. So I guess this is more true to my reality of gaming. Anyway, that being said, last time around, we basically went through the Carcosa campaign, ended up going through it with a couple of investigators, because one of them fell, as you do. And that all came to a head and is wrapped up. And so now we're starting a brand new campaign. And by the popular vote of Twitter, we are going to be taking on the Return to Dunwich Legacy, which I've actually been playing a fair bit, so I'm fairly familiar with it, but it'll be cool to do it on stream. And for the particular investigator that was picked by Twitter, I think it'll be interesting. And the investigator that was picked is Joe Diamond. So our newest seeker, who came out in the Circle Undone, is going to be pitted against Return to Dunwich Legacy. I'm kind of excited for this because the two investigators I played last time around, which was Father Mateo and Caroline Fern, they're okay solo, but they're not like the really cream of the crop solo investigators. So I'm excited to take on an investigator that I think is a bit more cut out for solo play. But we'll see. That also means I don't have any good excuses if he fails and falls flat on his face, which could very well happen. Mr. Trench in chat asking if I'm quiet because everyone is asleep. Probably. Hopefully it's not too quiet. I tried to turn up the volume a bit. And I've tried to fix some settings in the interim because my last video was very... The quality wasn't great, so I've tried to fix some settings. Hopefully that reflects in this video. If it doesn't, I'll have to do some more tweaking, especially because we'll be doing some actual playing on TTS, Tabletop Simulator, next time. So hopefully I can get some good quality going for that. Alright, that's enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and flick over to our good friend ArkhamDB and get started on this Joe Diamond deck. Here we go. Now, since it's just me this time around and I am truly abandoned and alone, I guess I should introduce myself. I'm Ian from the Mythos Busters. This is a Mythos Busters production. Hi. I forgot to say that. Since it's just me, Ian, this time around, truly abandoned and alone, I can go about building this deck in the way that I most prefer. And Bertez in the chat asking, did the last run end in Black Stars Rise? Yes, I guess that's a bit of a spoiler if you haven't watched that campaign, but I guess it's kind of spoiled by the fact that the last video I did was Black Stars Rise, and I didn't do one for Dim Carcosa for good reason. And unfortunately that video also had a problem where it froze midway through, so it was kind of ended up just being an audio track. So you can go back and watch that one still, but yeah, basically if you don't feel like going back to that campaign, yeah, it ended in Black Stars Rise. Caroline had a very bad run of luck at the end. Hey, Scott. All right, so as I was saying, I could do this my way. I did it my way. I realize looking at the stream, the chat is probably not super legible because it's designed to be against the darker screen usually when I'm playing TTS, and this is against the white screen of RtDL. So, oh well, we will make do. So I feel like the way I've usually been building Joe, I'm not like super experienced with Joe, but he's my blind play of Circle and Done right now. And the way I generally build him is build his special deck first. And let's go ahead and do a reminder for those who it's been a while. His deck building is a deck of 40. Seeker 0 to 5, Guardian 0 to 2, Neutral 0 to 5. And he has his special Insight deck, which basically you pick 10 cards with 10 events, I should specify, with the Insight trait, and then Joe Diamond's weakness, which is called Unsolved Case, and those form the 11 cards of your Insight deck. And then the remaining 30 cards of your deck is, just your normal 30 card deck that you would have for most investigators, although not all. So I kind of like to build that Insight deck first, because then whatever you didn't put in there is what you can put in your normal deck, if you so choose. Now, in playing and building a few Joe Diamond decks, I feel like I've really gotten locked into an Insight deck that I like. So I'm kind of curious if any of you in chat will shake that up for me a bit and maybe suggest some cards that I'm not thinking of that could potentially be a good fit for that deck. So I'm going to go ahead and use my handy search ability to pick out the Insight cards, and let's go through and let's add some cards, and we can go over if we want and cut down. Like I usually do for the main deck, we can do that with Insight deck too. Mr. Trench mentioning low sanity, lots of card draw, and shit defensive stats. A perfect fit for the campaign. Yeah, that's gonna be potentially rough. We'll see how it goes. I mean, I've had to deal with those same problems in TCU too, so a little bit of training. But we'll see how things go. And yeah, we're gonna build it right now. Usually I start off, I guess I should have specified, but usually I start off the Abandon Alone with actually building the deck on stream. And then next time around we'll get started with either Extracurricular or House Always Wins. At the end of this one I'll probably talk about which one I'm gonna do first. And maybe you can give me some insight into which one is better for Joe. Okay, so one last thing, I guess the kind of big elephant in the room is that Taboo. Are we going Taboo? And I think we should go Taboo, because why wouldn't you go Taboo? So I'm going to go Taboo, which means, do I plan for higher ed or not? Which is now 8 XP if I remember correctly. And Dunwich is the stingiest campaign in terms of XP, so getting 8, that could be like Essex County Expresses by the time I'm getting 8 XP. Or maybe, well, Miskatonic gives a fair few, so maybe at end of Miskatonic. But that means nothing else until that time. Or do I just let it ride? We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Okay, let's see. I'm just catching up on chat here. You don't have to include dumb cards like Crack the Case, Mr. Trench mentions. What we shall see. Okay, Insight cards. Let's do this. I think I'm going to go ahead and pick out one that is like a no-brainer that no one's going to convince me to take out. That's Working a Hunch. I guess I should go over his ability just as a refresher for those who aren't too familiar with Joe. Basically, at the beginning of the investigation phase, you reveal the top card of your Hunch deck. Oh, that's right. It's called the Hunch deck, not the Insight deck. And you can play that card as if it were in your hand at -2 cost. If you don't play it, it gets shuffled back into your Hunch deck. So Working a Hunch is fast. Fast cards are good for the Hunch deck. And it becomes a 0 cost fast to get a clue, and it's called working a hunch. So that's the clue that it goes in the hunch deck. Done, sealed, 2 out of 10 complete. Okay, let's see if I got any pro moves here. I do tend to like shortcut in the hunch deck, but it's also 0 cost, so it's potentially one that you could just have in your main deck, with the idea that, you know, some people would bring up the fact that it's better in your main deck because it goes in your hand and then you can play it at any time, whereas if it's in the hunch deck, it's only good or only usable when it bothers to show up. On the other hand, though, if it's in your hunch deck, it's not taking up space in your main deck. So maybe shortcut, we'll think about it. I do like Preposterous Sketches quite a bit, because all of a sudden it becomes a 0 cost to draw 3 cards, which is great. So I'm going to go ahead and add that. And feel free to yell at me if you don't like that card in there, but I like it. Bertez to the 4th power. Bertez mentions that I actually haven't played in a long time, but isn't Crack the Case pretty good in a post-Milan world? Yeah, I do like Crack the Case. I think Mr. Trench was just joking about the somewhat controversial inclusion of Crack the Case in the Daisy build we did on a recent Mythosbusters episode. No Stone Unturned is one that I often include, so I'll go ahead and throw it in and take it out if we need to. Again, that's more card draw. It's basically becomes, instead of a 2 cost, it becomes a 0 cost to search the top 6 of your deck for a card. Now, one thing we need to worry about, which is something that Mr. Trench brought up, is that this is the cycle of Beyond the Veil, which means if we include too much card draw, it might end up hurting us if we are doing too much card draw. So maybe we don't do 2 prep sketches and 2 No Stone Unturns, but I'm just going to throw them in there for now. I think the big things to worry about in this campaign is 1, Beyond the Veil, as always. Can we include stuff to counter that? And 2, just willpower problems in general. There's treacheries that can hurt us, and then we also have to think about Undimensioned and Unseen coming down the pike, and Joe Diamond has a very low 2 willpower, so how the heck is he going to deal with that if we don't take higher ed, is the question. Okay, let's take a look. Logical reasoning. When I first built Joe, I did include it in the hunch deck, and I've turned around. I think it's now better in the main deck. For the reason that you kind of want it in your hand to use it when you need to, but actually more importantly than that, because I think it can be okay in the hunch deck too, and you using it when it shows up, but more importantly because it has the 2 will icons, and if that's in your hunch deck, it's not doing you any good. If it's in your deck, your main deck, then you can commit it to test, and Joe needs all the willpower help he can get. So I'm going to say no logical reasoning for hunch deck. Okay. Knowledge is power. Nope, we're not using tomes or spells. Unless I'm forgetting something. You can scream at me if I'm forgetting something obvious. Guidance. Nope, we're playing solo, so don't need to help other investigators. Crack the Case. Potentially something to include in our main deck. After investigator discovers the last clue, which is like we're always going to be able to trigger that because we're always going to be the investigator that discovers the last clue, unlike multiplayer where we might not be in the right location when an investigator discovers the last clue. We're always going to be there when that happens, and we get resources. So I don't think that's a hunch deck card, because sometimes it's hard to find the optimum time for Crack the Case as it is, so we don't want it to have to worry about it showing up at the right time. So we'll come back to that. Connect the dots. Discovered 2 clues at a location with a lower shroud. That's probably not going to happen in solo. I'm just trying to think of some corner cases. After you discover the last clue, then you discover 2 clues. No, not in solo. Barricade. There's not really a great advantage to having it in the hunch deck that I can think of. I've got a plan. The discount is really nice because I've got a plan is expensive. We can drop it down to 1. The problem is I've got a plan as one of those cards that you really need it when you need it. And if it's busy like shifting around in your hunch deck, it's not there when you need it. So I'm not too sure about that. I don't really like it that much for a hunch deck. Okay. People mentioning the delay is long. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. I'll have to look into the delay issue. Okay, let's see. What else do we have? Anatomical diagrams. I mean, the nice thing is it becomes a 0 cost fast, and you essentially can drop an enemy -2 fight, -2 evade. It's interesting. It's not one I usually include in my hunch deck, but if I'm going to take out one of the card draw cards, then it might be something I look at. Okay, I think there's a few that I might circle back around. Unearth the Ancients. No. Vantage Point. Yeah, let's look at the Guardian events. I think that'll be a little bit easier to look through. Delay the inevitable. Emergency aid. Evidence. Interrogate. And scene of the crime. Scene of the crime, like working a hunch, is a no-brainer for me. Goes straight in there. It becomes a 0 cost to get 1 clue, 2 clues if there's an enemy. This is another one that I think it's possible to argue that maybe you want it in your main deck because sometimes it's hard to get it when you need it. But in my experience, like, I'm happy just having it kind of show up in my hunch deck, and if anything, like, you don't need an enemy there. In solo especially, usually you just need 1 clue and just play it for 0 and get a clue. Interrogate. I don't think we need that kind of clue help. And emergency aid. It's potentially interesting. It's like 0 cost healing. Usually I would say, are we going to need that much healing? But we might if we're like going it alone and no one else to help us. Delay the inevitable. That's an interesting one because it's fast, it becomes 0, and it basically gives you some kind of like, if you want to pay for it at the end of it lasts until the end of the next upcoming Mythos phase, and then at that point you can actually spend 2 resources. So, and importantly, I'm just sorry, I'm trying to read through the card to make sure. Yeah, so when you're dealt damage, you discard it and cancel all damage. So it lasts through the Mythos phase. So potentially it's something that could help you if you have Beyond the Veil and you throw this down and it just soaks it all if you get the timing right. So That's the only thing, though. If I want it for that specific purpose, and I need the timing to be right for something like Beyond the Veil, then it's not as great in the hunch deck unless I'm just going to keep spending the 2 resources to keep it around forever. So I'm thinking this is a very necessary card for this deck in general for Dunwich to deal with Beyond the Veil, but I don't think it's necessarily for the hunch deck. But I'm going to go ahead and throw it in now. Arkham DB is going to count it as part of my hunch deck, but I don't think I'm going to put it there. Let's go back to the Seeker Insights events then. So Bertez is saying that I feel like Shortcut is better in your hand because you don't want to move every turn, especially in Essex County. Yeah, it's one of those things where you might want to bank it for later, which is the case. So I guess the question now then is, I have Scene of the Crime, Working Hunch, Preposterous Sketches, and No Stone Unturned. That's my usual array. And then my last is Shortcut. But I'm wondering if I don't try something a little different this time. But the question is what? If you guys have a great suggestion, I'd love to hear it. Yeah, I was just taking a look at Bertez is mentioning Persuasion. I was just taking a look at that. A non-weakness humanoid. And you test Intellect 3. So 4 to 3 at base. They get plus X if X is that enemy's horror value. If you succeed, you shuffle them into the encounter deck. There's quite a few humanoid enemies in Dunwich from what I remember. Too bad I can't shuffle a spheres. A conglomeration of spheres. I mean, Diamond Joe has other ways of dealing with enemies. Is this gonna show up at the time that I need it? Maybe? I like the thought of it, and I'm not too sure of what else I should take. I mean, are there times when I'm going to need to evade enemies and I could have Mind Over Matter and be evading at 4? That's another possibility. Mr. Trench mentioning Undimension is when you add CU and Hellbird to the deck. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so okay, some mentions in chat that stream might be frozen, just super choppy. Okay, yeah, I'll work out like I mentioned, I changed some of the settings and they might be I might need to tweak them some more to make this not as choppy. Okay. So I'll work on that for next time. Sorry about that. I don't know. I'm kind of stuck on the last card here. Anatomical Diagrams is interesting. But the problem is with 6 sanity, like, only be able to play that at the beginning of the game. So if Joe had a higher sanity, that would be possible, but he doesn't. So I think Persuasion, maybe? I don't know how often I'm going to use it, but it's interesting to me. Or Mind Over Matter. But that's only if I want to go Agility into